Hello everybody, and welcome to the Fortean Slip Bedtime Stories. Tonight, a listener submission. Winter of 1969 to 1970, myself and two friends from Central Ohio headed up to Crystal and Boyne near Lake Michigan to ski during a winter break from high school. One friend provided the car, the other was providing us access to his parents' cabin in Central Michigan as a halfway stop. My job was to buy the booze because I was really good at passing myself off as 21. On the way up, we hit an incredible snowstorm, absolutely whiteout conditions. Consequently, as we passed through the town where Central Michigan University is located, we decided to stop and stock up on some liquor, beer, wine, and a bit of the hard stuff. Thus provisioned, we continued our trip, but it was a slow 20 plus miles to my friend's family cabin, with the snow still coming down solid. I recall reading that the state got hit with 36 inches overnight, though that seems excessive in retrospect, but for certain it was a terrific blizzard. During the trip we regaled ourselves with stories of the Dogman and the Michigan Monster because there had been a real flurry of stories recently about encounters. The one I most recall is of two teenage girls stopped at a rural crossroads when this wolf-like thing had run on two legs up to their car and had grabbed the hair of the girl in the passenger seat, provoking the driver to punch the gas, leaving the Dogman and a hunk of her friend's hair behind. That story resonated because the newspapers reported that the two girls, when they had got to the local police station, were absolutely hysterical, and the passenger was, in fact, missing a hunk of hair. Thus fortified on monster stories, we finally reached the driveway to the cabin. I say driveway because it was more like a dirt road, which wound the better part of a mile into the woods before finally coming to a small clearing where the cabin and a few outbuildings were located. My friend opened the place up for us and we dragged our gear, including sleeping bags, in. Unfortunately, although the place had electricity, the only source of heat was a wood stove and there was no wood ready for use. There was a wood pile along with some saws and axes near the barn, but it was dark and scary and cold, and we'd already freaked ourselves out with our monster stories, and none of us was willing to spend time chopping wood, especially in such an isolated area, with a single light above one of the cabin doors to barely illuminate our efforts. Consequently, we piled into the upstairs and laid our sleeping bags out side by side on the floor near the only electrical outlet in the room, into which we plugged the hot comb, which one of the guys had packed. We then passed the hot comb back and forth, blowing hot air into our sleeping bags. Between that expedient and the liquor, we managed to survive a very cold night, though none of us got much sleep, in part because something just felt creepy. I can't explain it any better than to say that it felt like we were being watched. It's not that we heard or saw anything. It was just the heebies, like you sometimes get, and of course, we kept telling ourselves that we were just freaked out from telling our stupid stories on the way up. Nonetheless, as soon as dawn began to break, we packed up, anxious, especially as the snow had by then stopped, to get out of there. And here's the thing, when we came outside packing our gear, you could see quite distinctly a set of tracks leading from the woods to the cabin, and then around the cabin a couple times. Given the amount of snowfall, the tracks weren't terribly distinct, but they were clearly made by something bipedal, though they looked odd, almost too rounded to be human, even allowing for the distortion caused by wind and snow. What most freaked us out though was that there were no tracks, at least that we could see, leading back into the woods. I think we set a record for packing that car, and our friend who was driving was already in gear and moving when our other friend finished locking the place up and ran after us, jumping into the car as we pulled away. We didn't stop until we got to Boyne later that morning. Since then, we've all gone on with our lives. None of us are flakes or wackos, and none of us will ever talk about that night. This, I think, is only the fourth time I've told that tale, and only the second time to non-family. Was it the Dogman? I have no idea. I do know that we were way out in the woods, with no neighbors for over a mile, on an incredibly cold, dark night during which there was a major blizzard moving through. We'd arrived at the cabin around 10 p.m., and there were no tracks then, and we piled out of there at 6:30 a.m., meaning that our visitor had come sometime in the 8 or so hours between those times, in the darkest and coldest part of a dark and frigid night. So even a human visitor under those circumstances would have been extremely unusual. Yet whatever had made those tracks had come out of the woods, circled the cabin several times, and apparently spent some time under, looking up at the only window in the upstairs room where we were sleeping, or attempting to. What it was or what it was thinking down below the window, I don't like to think about. Now, however, you folks can think about it.